The Last of Us Part 2 is an immersive experience. This means that you get the most out of the game when you put yourself in the character's shoes. This video focuses on 3 things that scared away most players and left them detached from the experience altogether, whether they completed the story or not.
The Last of Us feels like an origin story for this survivor in this post-apocalyptic world. The concept for the sequel had to feel compelling enough, have enough weight that felt like, okay, this is an experience worth creating, worth spending the next 3 years on. I became really intrigued with the idea of the cycle of violence and how like certain events would trigger acts of violence that then would beget more acts of violence. It's almost never satisfying. It never brings the person you love back. And despite you thinking it's going to bring some closure, it doesn't. We just need more empathy. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could create an experience that lets you safely explore those feelings?
This video is about why The Last of Us Part 2 has such a negative perception.
The hatred.
First, I'd like to explain a possible playtesting process as I see it. Then I want to express the fears of everybody involved and how these fears ruin the experience and perception of the game. Keep in mind, this is a story-driven game where the player's choices do not affect the narrative or the ending.
When you already know exactly what you're supposed to do in the game, you've memorized everything, it's hard to have a true experience with it. You have to bring in people from the outside to play it fresh.
For able-bodied players, they probably split the players into 3 groups. The first group is returning players of Part 1. The second group is of new players, which are players who never played Part 1 and clearly never played Part 2 because they're in the process of playtesting. The third group is a mix of both. And they most likely prioritize the returning players because word of mouth is still the most important way of marketing. Out of both games, The Last of Us Part 2 is the quote-unquote scariest one. There are plenty of reasons for this, but I just want to talk about 3. The first reason is the most obvious, is that the game is a sequel. The first game was easier and less of a burden to make and want to play because they had no pressure from fans and the studio.
Which means it's going to feel twice as long as the first game. So when you freak out, that's normal. That's part of this.
So many people were like, Last of Us 1 is so perfect. It should never have a sequel. They shouldn't make a sequel.
Now, imagine you have to playtest a sequel to a game you never played or heard of. This will either automatically make the playtester feel like the first game wasn't good enough and didn't warrant a sequel, or make them want to go play the game first in order to understand what's going on. Maybe they might be excited to play a new game and see why the first game was good enough for a sequel. This is all happening without even touching the controller or seeing the screen. This automatically puts the gamer's mind into critic mode, just because they didn't play the first game. When their mind is in critic mode, it automatically puts the game in a negative light and it has to redeem itself in order to be proper, rather than just having expectations of it being proper and then it diminishing over time because of how it plays. This will ruin the experience and the story for those players who see the game in a negative light. They'll be constantly in their head, they'll be asking questions. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? Because they never played the first game. This is what ruins the experience because it takes you out of the immersion and it just makes you it makes you question why you're playing the video game itself instead of why the characters are here and this. Anyways, the end result is them not caring about the game at all, or caring so much you get the fear of missing out and need to play the first game. And if they quit to go play the first game, it makes them a returning player, which will give them a whole set of other different feelings once they experience the first story. This is not even including the players that thought the first game was perfect and didn't need sequels, or the ones who hated the first game and felt the same way.
People outside the studio have such an attachment to the first game, and I've definitely seen fears about not wanting to make a sequel because somehow if it's bad, it will tarnish your feeling about the first game.
I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill every last one of them.
We're doubling down on those fears and not calling it The Last of Us some subtitle. It's The Last of Us Part 2 to say it's all one story.
Whether you loved the first game, hated it, or didn't play it, this game's existence gives the player negative feelings automatically. Just by it being a sequel, it's gonna give you negative feelings. You're gonna start the game in a negative light. Besides, the only people who won't feel negative feelings right out the gate would be those who wanted a sequel, expected a sequel, and were waiting for the sequel.
Every time we have some showing of our games, if it's going to be seen publicly, it's got to be one of the best looking playing things in the industry. For example, the first trailer was coming online, and that forced us to define the look of our game, define the location of where the game takes place, define Ellie's look and her age and her hair and her outfit.
Let's say none of that matters and you love this game, story and the gameplay, and don't care about none of the negative feelings. This brings me to another reason why the game scares the players away, and it sounds silly, but hear me out. The game's visuals are way too realistic. The game itself is too realistic, but mainly its appearance. Nobody talks about this, but it literally hinders the game. Allow me to say this. First of all, this is just my opinion, but part 1 for PS3 and PS4 looked and played like video games, which is why it worked so well for me. The first game looking kind of cartoonish, kind of Fortnite-like, helped for when you were too scared and the game started working too hard. When the clickers came and everything, and you're just like, whoa, I could just rush this. Like, this is a video game. This ain't real life. I don't have to actually. So that's what made it fun. When you could just go rush people, punch them up, get shot, you know? It's like a video game. You can get shot, still beat somebody up who has a whole gun. Now, whenever I play this game or watch a video about it around my family, they always ask what movie or TV show is it. This is good because it shows that they are interested in the world, characters, and story. I want to find out what is going on, but when I tell them it's a game, they are turned off and walk away. This is a main issue with games and story-driven games as a whole, at least the ones with realistic graphics. They're interested and then they just walk out once they hear it's a video game, because what? Nobody has time to play a video game all the way through, but that's besides the point.
One of the biggest reactions was when the HUD came on. They looked at that forest and thought, there's no way it can look this good. Like, that's impossible. But when we flash the HUD and be like, yeah, that's it. This is the real game. People are not ready for this. Like, this is gonna fuck you up.
The game's realistic appearance will turn off players in many ways, mostly overwhelming them. And it'll put them in a state of fear, especially given the content of this game. Basically, the player is too immersed in the game because of how real it looks. And because the game looks so real, the player will try to deal with issues in realistic ways, but based on the individual player's general outlook on life. This is a terrible example, but it makes sense. Say the game is asking you to go somewhere, but a bush is in the way. If you never jumped or ran through a bush in your life, you might see it as an obstacle. But if you love running through bushes in real life, the game would seem unrealistic not being able to run through the bush. This specific hypothetical rarely appears in the game, but you can see where I'm coming from. It's not a unique problem to The Last of Us Part 2, but it's a very bad thing for the long run. It affects the pacing in a major way. The same issue of realism applies to the exploring and looting. I'd say it affects the exploring and looting more than it affects the combat. The fear of being attacked while low on supplies is a major part of the gameplay loop. But the issue lies with the environments. Because it is so detailed, it can be hard to determine where to go or what's even possible. And seeing how little loot is given, especially on harder difficulties, it makes looting and exploring seem like a tedious letdown. Looking if you can open every cabinet is annoying and takes a lot of trial and error, and will throw off the narrative's pacing if the player decides to do so. The overwhelmingly detailed environments and lack of loot causes over-exploration, which is bad for the pacing.
This player's pretty lost, trying to figure out this puzzle here, and they're trying to jump on a truck. He's got a really awesome solution here where he's putting this plank on a dumpster, and now he's moving the dumpster around. So we'll probably have to go in there and like try and fix some of that stuff up, but we'd rather figure that out now than in 6 months.
You're also looking at sort of layout structure. Bloodborne had a very sort of an open space that sort of kept getting bigger and bigger as you explored. I really like that feeling that you get of mastery over the world. It starts to become kind of almost a character in the game itself.
It's quite heartbreaking when you see people who are like really confused or don't get it, and it's something you think like it should be obvious, but it's not at all.
The tone of the violence in the game has always been important to portray as realistically as possible.
Because of its realism, you are scared constantly and put in fight or flight in every encounter. It's not the same feeling as seeing 5 Goombas to stomp in Mario, but it's the same thing happening. Enemies come in your path. When you see an enemy but you personally never had a fight in your life, you might not want to engage at all and just sneak and run away. But if you fought anybody in real life, you might just rush the NPC to see what happens, or attack when his head is turned to guarantee the victory or whatever. They made NPCs seem even more realistic in their actions and voice lines, making them seem like more of a threat, depending on the individual player. The effect is the same for dogs. Whether you love or are afraid of dogs in real life would result in different reactions from different players. So if you're afraid of dogs, you're probably not even going to want to fight a dog in this game. Or you'll just shoot them and waste all your explosives on them like I did. But if you love dogs, you'll probably just avoid them, not try to kill them. But then they talk about in the thing how they tried to make the dogs seem more threatening so you could want to kill them. How did they do that? By mostly making them black, but it's okay. Anyways, this also makes the already frightening infected seem more horrifying due to the realistic graphics. Not to mention the added fear of being unequipped for fights. Sneaking around or trying to find a way out of combat is a relatively lengthy process compared to just shooting your way through it. Because there is no time limit in the combat sections, this will ultimately throw the story's pacing off, depending on if the player spends too much time in them. In conclusion, being afraid lowers the story's quality, but increases gameplay to a degree.
So one of the things that I've always found really exciting about The Last of Us is the kind of fidelity with which we represent human intelligence.
One of the ways that really helped make them feel more human and more alive was the way that they used their body language to communicate to each other.
Everybody spread out. We may have multiples.
We want these characters to just feel grounded and believable in the world, properly shifting their weight and moving the way a real human would.
Any one mechanic is not maybe anything you haven't seen before. It's the combination of how it all comes together, the way it works with the animation system.
Both of these points lead me into my next point, which is what scared most players away and left a permanent stain on the franchise and its perception: the negative press. Now, this next bit is a little bit of theory, but it's based in common sense, and I'll get back to the facts, but listen. Now I'm circling back to the playtester perspective. I imagine the devs would need to separate the original players from the new ones so they could see if they could get them on equal footing. An example would be like what questions they would ask while playing. And another example would be like, why did we stop playing as the old guy, and who is Abby? Anyways, I assume they had different playtester groups play on different days, and the result of this had all the playtesters leaving at the same time and meeting in the parking lot / elevator, and they were discussing what transpired inside the building. The devs probably started switching out different people in each group once the rumors started flowing. I assume the earliest rumors started from OG players that didn't want a sequel. Maybe they were roommates with a playtester or something. I also assume that the playtesters knew each other beforehand, at least some of them, but most of them definitely kept in contact after because of the power of the internet and social media and all that. Like, we could get in contact with each other in an instant. This contributed to rumors being spread in the early development. The playtesters only played a few hours on certain levels, and only a select few of trusted individuals probably got to finish it. Most likely the family of the devs or playtesters that they knew for years.
And so we try to start playtesting as early as possible. We've got testers in bright and early. They're going to start playing the game. They're actually just right across the hall over here.
It is a fire drill. Because things have to work.
So I'm currently watching the 10 people that we have in at the moment focus testing.
You know, like they're going to lunch and like expressing doubt to each other and like, is this going to come together? Is this the one that like screws Naughty Dog up? Let me just exude whatever confidence I have left. Let me try to bestow this person with it so they can feel inspired and go off and do their work. But then sometimes you're alone in the office and you're like, what if this doesn't come together? What if this is the one that sucks? What if this is the one that sinks Naughty Dog? So then you have to like kind of bury it, compartmentalize it. Who knows what damage it does to your body while you're doing that? Because ultimately, you can't let that fear dictate how you work, and just keep the faith.
I say all this because the first time I heard rumors of the game's plot being leaked was from a YouTube video where the author stated a playtester said that we were not playing as Joel. I remember it being very clickbaity, so I dismissed it, but I always kept thinking it was possible because Joel was barely in the marketing. A few days or weeks after I seen that video, the leaks happened. There were a few other videos in my recommended before that point, but I thought they were all clickbait. This time it was real leaks because multiple people were making videos that same day, all upset, all talking about Joel's death and the story. Nobody cared about the gameplay, which is what I wanted leaked so I could see if the game was worth buying. because up to that point there wasn't much footage that looked like genuine gameplay. But anyway, back to the point. The negative attention from the leaks turned off a lot of players in general. When 7 YouTube videos say the same thing, that the game is bad, the person on YouTube is going to make a mental note and probably not even going to watch one video because 6 others are saying the same thing. Out of fear that the YouTubers are correct and they don't want to be disappointed, they will never pick up the game. And if they do pick up the game, they will be in the same position as the playtesters, and the game itself might scare them away. And what I mean by in the same position as the playtesters is they're going to be playing a game playing a sequel to a game they never played, which will give them all those negative feelings and make them want to go play the first one and put their mind in critic mode and all that. So the end result is a combination of Simon Says and broken telephone. So Simon says that the game is garbage. Somebody's gonna say this game is trash. Somebody's gonna say this game is boring. When they go play the game, all that negativity that was spread online, they're just gonna have it in the back of their mind. They're gonna be waiting for certain sections. They're gonna just be crossing off things in their list, in their mind. Be like, yeah, he's right. That's garbage. Yeah, that was garbage. That was garbage. He's just waiting for the garbage without trying to make up his own mind about it. He's just following. Bonus points. The difficulty in this game was made so players could set it as they like. This was probably a result of the different kinds of gamers they had playtesting. Some probably liked racing games and such. Others liked card games or something. This is most likely why the game is so polarizing, because a literal blind person can play it and finish it. This is good for inclusiveness, story, and sales, but is bad for quality gameplay because a literal blind person can play it. What's stopping a player from switching the difficulty, which automatically breaks immersion, or hitting a slider? I believe the intended experience was closer to the survivor difficulty, but because of complaints they had during the playtesting process, they made the difficulty more customizable and added way more hints. Now, the end result is the game is the easiest or hardest game in the Last of Us series, depending on what difficulty you select.
And so we try to start playtesting as early as possible. Brandon Cole, he said, I heard you announce this game. What do you think about the possibility of someone like myself being able to play it? And Brandon is blind.
Players with disabilities still want to have challenge.
It's not about just making an easy mode.
So a thing that, I couldn't tell you if it makes business sense to some degree, but...
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that early success really helped to build momentum for the rest of the project.
Anyways, conclusion. The game's existence is scary. It was an uphill battle from its inception. Devs felt pressure from every direction. That's a bar. Fans, studio, and themselves. It being a sequel was bound to divide and scare off players regardless of what the story presented. It being a more realistic look at a barren, empty world scares a lot of people because there's no Uber, there's no nothing. You literally have to walk everywhere, search everything, and do everything yourself. This is not going to go good in the game. Others fear the confrontation of the NPCs and the infected, and a lot of people are afraid to make up their own minds. Also, I'd like to say that playing as Abby falls into the it's a sequel category, because the player is like, who is she and why am I playing as her, whether you played part 1 or not. Joel dying falls into it's too realistic, because you've seen his bashed in head for a total of 3 seconds on screen, but the image is burned into your head whether you mourn for him, knew him, or not.
It's really hard to see these characters that you spend so much time with and, for lack of a better word, kind of like, birthing into existence, tortured and abused.
It's hard to imagine the story without Joel dying. Like, you feel that hate, Ellie feels that hate. You're one-to-one, you're on the stick, and that informs the rest of the story.
We're gonna start the game where you're playing a new character. That sequence ends with this character killing Joel. And we really have to paint her as this monster. Then when you play the next chunk of the game and you're Ellie and you're gonna pursue justice, quote unquote, and you're gonna go kill this entire crew, we're gonna go back in time and show you that same sequence of events, this character that you saw as a monster, to now get you to see things from her perspective. And how this crew is a bunch of people trying to survive in this world. And they had their reasons for pursuing and finding Joel and killing him.
You okay?
Yeah.
We get you through interactivity to really connect and empathize with this character.
You look like you heard of us or something.
And then make you feel like I've led Joel to a trap.
Sweet.
The biggest change that has happened since the initial pitch is Ellie is there when Joel is killed. It used to be she came across the body, and then she had to rely on Tommy's testimony of what happened. And we shifted it, which made it much more dramatic and intense for her. And I think puts more of it on screen and again, allows you better to understand why she needs to pursue these people. We want him to die in this really unforgiving sort of way. Like, it needs to feel senseless for you to say, fuck these people, I'm gonna pursue them to the ends of the earth and make them pay. Mm-hmm. When the club comes down and it's just like, she's screaming, I feel like we could just take all their audio out and like music could take over. And again, we're trying to build more rage than sadness. That's gonna really set up our journey.
If you don't like this game, you are afraid in some way. Part 1 is about love and hope. Part 2 is about hate and fear.
The hatred